Good morning, Liberty. It is Wednesday morning, May 22nd, 2019. My name is Michael Bolden, broadcasting to you live from here in my home office and studio in downtown Los Angeles for the 10th Amendment Center. We're broadcasting through multiple channels over on YouTube, Facebook, DLive, Twitch, and Periscope. And of course, we have all of our archives plus the iTunes version where I appreciate all the new reviews coming in slowly but surely over at 10thamendmentcenter.com/goodmorningliberty. Today, we're talking about fascism. Fascism and the Green New Deal. Everyone, of course, when you're bad or if you do policies that the left doesn't like, they call you a fascist. I've heard this for years. Generally, it was racist, which is obviously, I think, what was the intent of my listing over at the Southern Poverty Law Center, or when Rachel Maddow spent 10 or 14 minutes talking about our work to nullify when Obama was in office, kept talking about us in relationship to slave owners in the pre-Civil War South. Now, I go really hard on Republicans, both on this show and then on my Twitter account, which I think if you haven't followed yet, it's at Michael Bolden, all spelled out. You could join me there. It's small. I engage with people. But I go pretty hard on Republicans for their hypocrisy. We hear so many times, or at least I have, at least in this work here, that Republicans are the party of small government, of the Constitution, at least to some degree. There's a base fiber that supports the Constitution. And lately, we've heard a lot of Republicans slamming on socialism. And they're absolutely right to do so because it is a terrible economic and political system. It's not founded in the federal system. I mean, certainly if people want to have socialist systems locally or in their own state, that's up to them. I don't support it. In some ways, sometimes I do because it's a great example of how it fails. So here in California, the best thing for socialism would be for California to aggressively expand it, maybe on single-payer healthcare, so we don't have to do a test run on the whole country. So Republicans rightly attack socialist programs very, very often. But as I was pointing on my Twitter last night, man, it's total hypocrisy to hear them saying on the one side that they're opposed to socialism, but at the same time, they're supporting almost an endless litany of socialist or socialist-style programs. I think the opposition by many in the Republican, and I'm talking primarily pundits and establishment types in office. Now, the general public, it's hard to, you can't nail down millions and millions of people. But the office holders will hear, oh, we're opposing Obamacare. Well, we're doing repeal and replace. So they don't necessarily oppose the socialist principle of having a command and control system dictating some policies about healthcare, which is supposed to be reserved to the states. They just want a different version of it. I had someone tell me that Republicans only support private property, or in general, their private property. Now, I've never heard of the private property version of Medicare Part D, or the Real ID Act, or the Medicare Part D Patriot Act, or Social Security, or Medicare, or Medicaid, or the TSA, or police, or the military. I mean, there are various things where we can get into the nitty-gritty of and talk about hypocrisy on the right. But I think the hypocrisy on the left is just as bad. And one of the things that I regularly talk about is the hypocrisy on the general left in regards to war powers. When I first started out as an activist in the early 2000s, I was still a hard leftist. I proudly proclaim myself. I self-identified, not as I was I would call myself a Marxist. I remember someone asking me, this is really funny. I was in Milwaukee at the time, and I think this was Bush, Dole, whoever. Not Bush, Dole. Bush, Gore? Maybe Dole, Clinton? I don't know. One of those old school awful elections. And I'm in this gas station in Milwaukee. And everybody's asking, oh, this was the Florida, the hanging Chad one. So this must have been Bush versus Gore. And everybody's asking, who'd you vote for? Who'd you vote for? People are in line talking about what side they're on this in some regular gas station. And I get up there and I said, well, I would have voted for Gorbachev if I had an option. And I was serious about it. I mean, I was trying to jab at these people saying, I don't like any of these people. I'm a commie. So I was proudly taking that position. But I'll tell you, the left is extremely hypocritical as well, even though you may hear me talk about the right all the time. And when it comes to war and you're an anti-war activist, You quickly become aware of this when you find that the anti-war movement becomes minuscule. I mean, it still exists, but it's very small when the left is in power. And it starts creeping back up again. We hear a lot of talk, opposition to war powers, executive war powers, now that the Republicans hold the White House and most of the country, I guess. So there's a lot of hypocrisy there. But I think on socialism and fascism too, I mean, we're hammered. If you oppose a central program, if you're basically talking about decentralization or you don't want the government control over just about anything, you hear leftists say, well, you must be part of the alt-right or you're a fascist, whatever it may be. But one constitutional scholar that I follow very closely and I consider a friend and have worked with, even though we don't agree on everything, it doesn't matter. But he takes the position, and I'm going to go through this a little bit, but he takes the position that the Green New Deal, pushed by the AOCs and the Bernies of our time, this isn't really a socialist program. It more closely resembles a fascist program. So this is not something I have a lot of expertise in, but I thought it was really interesting, and I figured let's ramble about this and talk it about a little, and maybe you guys will give me feedback and tell me what's stupid, what's smart, what isn't. I'd love to hear what you guys have to say. And speaking of that, hello to everyone over in the live chat. I really appreciate everyone who joins me during the live show. I'm grateful for everyone who joins me in the archive as well, but it's fun to be able to talk with people, at least engage a little bit during the live program as well. Over on YouTube, we've got David Michael. I know it's later in the day for you, David. Justin Bayola, Rachel Kennerly, good to see you. You should check out Rachel's Cannabis podcast. Frank I, EHP Training, Shane Lackey, Woodsider, Bob Brewer, good to see you, buddy. And I missed noticing your super chat maybe a week or so ago, so thank you for that, Bob. Idamon, who reminds us to smash the like. So if you like it, make sure to hit that like button. And then, of course, the Austrian Watchman over on Facebook, Arby, Michael, Dan Reed, Dwayne Helton, Jeff Chase, a few others. I appreciate everybody who's here. I'm sorry if I missed anybody. I'm grateful that there's enough that I can actually miss people. So let's get into this. First of all, I want to cover this article from Foundation for Economic Education that was on Monday from Joe Carter. 5 facts about fascism. Just as a quick reminder that this year marked the 100th anniversary of the forming of the fascist movement in Milan. So it's interesting that we have all this talk about fascism. Now, I think, and I agree with Joe in his 5 points here, and I'm not going to cover all of them, that A, the term fascist or fascism is used as an attack. Oh, you're a fascist isn't a, oh, hey, man, you're pretty awesome. You're not replacing the word fascist with awesome or amazing or smart. It's always used as an attack. I guess there's probably a segment who's like, who someone says, hey, man, you look like a fascist. And the guy's response is like, hey, thanks. But I'm assuming in most people's cases, most people's lives, if you're called a fascist, it's to attack you. Now, you may laugh it off. It may piss you off. It may offend you, whatever it may be. I don't know. And this is what Joe had to say over at fee.org. And again, all the links are in the show notes over at 10thamendmentcenter.com/goodmorningliberty. He says the term fascist has been used as an insult so much it has diluted the meaning, and in particular the evil nature the word carries. And I can't remember the episode number, but TomWoods.com, if you go through his podcast list on his website, just do Command F or whatever, Alt F, depending on what kind of machine you're on, and look up fascist. You're going to find some good stuff there. And he points out that it is really a misunderstood meaning. People throw it out there for just about everything. I have been attacked for calling Republicans socialist because clearly I don't know what I'm talking about because, for example, Social Security can't be a socialist program because I'm told over and over that people pay into this. Not that they're robbed from it to pay for a future or a different generation and that they're done by the force of a gun, but that they're voluntarily paying in somehow. That's the mentality. But Social Security is a socialist program. Whether you want to get your money back from it or not is a different story. I certainly think people should take as much back from the government that's been stolen from them as possible. But he says, as a form of political practice, fascism arouses popular enthusiasm by sophisticated propaganda techniques for an anti-liberal. And on Fee, they generally use the term liberal to mean classical liberal, the founder's version. Anti-socialist, violently exclusionary, expansionist, nationalist agenda. They talk about 5 stages of fascism. It's an interesting article. But really what's interesting about fascism is that it is a type of socialism, at least according to this. And they write, a primary goal, stated goal of fascist governments is autarky, or national self-sufficiency. But as an economic system, says Sheldon Richman, who I read regularly over at libertarianinstitute.org, that's Scott Horton, his great website, fascism is socialism with a capitalist veneer. I mean, they didn't call the Nazis National Socialists for nothing. Of course, my socialist friends reject this view, and they see them as entirely different. It's almost like, well, that's not a real socialist. We hear this in the constitutional world, in the libertarian world. Everyone's attacking everybody for not being a real tenther or a real libertarian. They've got a different version. Well, the socialists do the same with national socialists too. So that's just a quick point. Now, I want to get into Rob Nadelson's article on this, Is the Green New Deal Fascist? And he talks about, he introduces it, and I used a little bit of this in my introduction to the show in the show notes. And he says, the Green New Deal often is described as socialist. This may be because 2 of its best-known advocates, Bernie Sanders and AOC, are avowed democratic socialists. Now, a study of the GND program, however, shows that it is more accurate to classify it as a sort of domestic fascism. This was really interesting to me. And again, this is something that I'm learning here. Jerry Hickman points out, and this is not something I've studied really well, so it's kind of fun to explore it with you guys as well. Jerry Hickman over on Facebook says socialists support fascism. And again, he's pointing out the Nazi thing. It's a democratic socialist. And that's at least my view. I know there's infighting or outfighting on that type of thing. Oh, and hi to Tyler B, who says, sorry, I'm late. Good to see you, buddy. So Rob goes on. He says, 2 important documents outline the Green New Deal. The first is a congressional resolution that was introduced by AOC. And then they also had an FAQ fact sheet. The fact sheet was actually deleted from a website, but Rob was smart enough to download it, and he's uploaded it as a PDF, so we've got it here. If you just click through and read this, you're definitely going to be able to see what they've maybe scrubbed. I don't know if they've tried to scrub it or they're just not really pushing this. Who knows? But it was uploaded on February 7th and was formally available on her website. And Rob goes on, he says, the documents show that the GND program is not solely or even principally an environmental manifesto. It's sold as one, just like the Patriot Act was sold to us primarily by Republicans, but supported by Democrats as a form of patriotism. But clearly, you are not a patriot if you support violating the Constitution all the time, like what the existence of the Patriot Act is a horrible attack on the Constitution. So that is a fake name. And of course, it's a positive name. People want to be patriots. Samuel Adams was a great patriot. I mean, this is a positive association. Green New Deal. I want a clean environment. I lived in a neighborhood that was like 3 blocks from Skid Row here in downtown Los Angeles. Largest homeless population in the country. Crap, needles on the street, rats, all kinds of stuff. I lived there for a number of years. And I don't like a dirty city. So I moved to a much cleaner neighborhood. I don't have any of that anymore. So I like green and clean. So the idea of a green, now I know the term New Deal comes from FDR, and that to me I automatically reject because it's garbage, unconstitutional, expansionist government stuff that has been supported by both political parties for decades. But I like the idea of green and clean. And I think that a lot of people in the general public believe in the social safety net stuff that has been pushed on us and sold to us through the government schools for so long. So this is a positive term. It's good propaganda. But Rob points out that it's not really about the environment. And it calls for, in the words of the FAQ sheet that we have a link to here, quote, a massive transformation of our society. And he says key elements of the program parallel fascism as preached and practiced between the world wars, and here are some examples. And I'm just going to power through these. I'd love to hear your thoughts. Please leave me some comments, whether it's live here or in the archives. I'm curious what you think about them as well. There's, looks 6 or 7. 7. 8. 8. And then 1 where they're different. So he's talking about the areas where the Green New Deal and fascism are similar. 1, fascists recognize no limits to central government power, and the Green New Deal sponsors seem to agree. They seek government control over many aspects of life: healthcare, employment, housing, finance, manufacturing and other industry, agriculture, and other land use. Not even private homes would be safe. Every home in America is to be upgraded to meet a range of criteria, including affordability, comfort, and durability. The amount of centralized power it's going to take to implement this type of thing. A national police force of massive, there'll be regulators, but the enforcement to get this approved is huge centralized power. Now, maybe they'll do it in a kind of quasi-federalist system like we have today, like the way that they enforce immigration, the way that they force federal gun control, the way that they implement environmental regulations, whereas they have only a few thousand people. So, for example, the ATF has about 500 or 5,500 employees for the whole country, with a third in administration. Most of the enforcement action is handled by state or local law enforcement. Even immigration, enforcement, and removal operations for the federal government, they only have about 6,000 employees, 6,100 for the whole country. This was a ramp up from about 5,500 or 5,000 under the Obama administration. Has not gone up very much. And so then they rely, and that's why sanctuary cities on immigration have so much impact, because the federal government doesn't have the manpower to do what they want to do, or what some people want the federal government to do. So they rely on the locals, and they hand out money, and they do asset forfeiture theft, and there's this whole kind of back and forth thing with enforcement. We know the National Governors Association back in 2013, during the last so-called shutdown, and I put shutdown in quotes, they were very concerned about the Fed stopping something because, as in their words, they said states are partners with the federal government on most federal programs. So it's possible that they may not. It's still a centralized command and control structure where they're dictating to the states or stealing money from people through taxation, regulation, tariffs, whatever it may be, getting a bunch of money, a war chest in Washington, D.C., and then funding the local communities and the states to do their bidding. And that's a serious, serious problem. Number 2, not all fascists are aggressive expansionists, but they think in military terms and seek to organize the society along military lines. And he says that the documents from the Green New Deal are loaded with militaristic language. It's organized. American society, he writes, as organized in World War II is held up repeatedly as a model. The congressional resolution uses the word war twice and mobilization 8 times. The fact sheet repeats war 6 times and mobilize or mobilization 6 times. Number 3, fascism does not require government ownership of the entire economy, but generally does feature some socialism. And of course, if we're thinking of socialism or communism as government or, quote, public, they like to say public ownership, like you're on public property, as if it's really run by the people, but it isn't. We know that. Government is not of the people. Government is not you and I. It is people running a system. The smaller it is, the less damage it can do. That's why we believe in federalism. That's why the founders supported it, because a centralized structure would be more damaging in its mistakes. And then, of course, you learn faster when you have competing systems. This is like a normal market response. So socialism generally, or communism, being public or government ownership of the means of production. You don't have to necessarily have that entirely in fascism. And in fact, I think it may have been Mises's book on socialism talking about, and it might have been Rothbard. I get it confused. There's so much good stuff out there. But certainly it has very little difference in practice whether the government totally owns an industry or if a private company is given a monopoly on that industry, and then the government dictates to them how they're allowed to run it. It doesn't really matter in the end. The end result is that government is in charge, and it really isn't a free choice. So Rob writes, under the Green New Deal, the government would obtain ownership interests in private companies, create government-owned banks, and encourage community ownership of enterprises. Community ownership sounds Marxist. As a former Marxist, I got to tell you, it sounds very Marxist to me. But then again, maybe it is fascist. 4, fascism is highly centralized, and the Green New Deal is to be managed from Washington, D.C. And of course, he points out again, and I think this goes back to the centralization of power, but they don't have any acknowledgement that the Constitution recognizes limited delegated powers. And again, we don't see this much on either side. 5th, traditional fascism is built around corporatism. And I think it was Mussolini who said at one point that fascism would most rightly be called corporatism because it is a merging of state and corporate power. But then again, if the corporations are basically doing the bidding of the government based on the government's restrictions or demands or needs, it doesn't really matter. To me, at least, it doesn't. Maybe you have a different view on this. But he says the term is unrelated to business corporations. Rather, it is the organization of society into guilds or interest groups that allegedly cooperate for the greater good. I was not aware of that. I'm learning this as I'm reading. I read it last night too, but that really kind of strikes me. I'm not aware of that one. Maybe someone has some better history on this too, but Rob could be absolutely correct. Number 6, as in fascism, the Green New Deal treats people as groups rather than as individuals. And Ron Paul, I think, was one who really hammered this home for me. And I think I was already going through my transition. I started transition. I was transitioning from status to wherever I am now. And Ron would repeatedly talk about how he doesn't like talking about people in groups. You can't be a racist if you believe in the individual. Because racism inherently is groupthink. Because you're referencing how people are based on an attribute of their skin or of their national origin, for example. And I don't know if that's necessarily just a fascist idea or if it's a statist idea. It could be fascist, socialist, mercantilist, corporatist, all of them. It sees people as groups, as tools to accomplish goals. Number 7, under fascism, he writes, the leader's quirky ideas often become enforceable law. A widely publicized example, Rob writes, from the Green New Deal is its prospective ban on air travel. And of course, they're going to not deny this, but surprise, surprise, we would have been told years ago that you would be nuts to think that your phone was monitoring your location even if you turn the power off, which is absolutely true because it keeps track of where you are and it sends that information out. You would be nuts to think that it was not anything beyond a future sci-fi movie that they could monitor where you are based on a facial scan. Well, that's being implemented and used in places like New York City. It was the first city in the country now to ban it has been San Francisco. We're working on efforts to ban it in New York, to ban it in Oakland and elsewhere. But the point on that, without just getting distracted in the facial recognition surveillance discussion, is to point out that quirky ideas or ideas that are seen as nuts or that'll never happen here do get implemented. And if you don't pay attention to the long game, you're a fool. And number 8, fascists are often secular evangelists with a passion for exporting their ideology. And the Green New Deal, Rob writes, prescribes that this is the resolution from AOC, prescribes that the U.S. is to become an international leader to help other countries achieve their own Green New Deal. And the fact sheet, the FAQs, talk about bringing about a global Green New Deal. I'm sure just like enforcing UN resolutions to invade countries, at some point there could be a UN resolution to enforce some kind of a Green New Deal on another country that doesn't want to comply. I think these are very interesting. I don't know which one's right, which one's wrong. Checking over a lot of interesting stuff over at the chat. Anna Reyes, I appreciate you liking that. You can't be racist if you believe in the individual. I'm mostly just pushing a message that I got from Ron Paul there. Shane Lackey points out that citizens can opt out at any time for any reason, with or without notice. Slaves cannot. Austrian Watchman, fascism is hidden socialism. And I don't know, and maybe we're almost and I say that too, like it's a form of socialism, and maybe I'm guilty of this as well. We're almost diminishing the socialist nature of the fascist system. And maybe we should just say fascist is a version of socialism. Of course, there's social democracy, there's Marxism, there's all these different versions of this command and control socialist redistribution program, or this political system, and maybe we need to actually change how we're talking about it. So Rob points out in his article that he says, these are some similarities, 8 of them. Are there any differences? And he says primarily 1. Fascist manifestos generally call for dictatorship or oligarchical rule, and the GND does not explicitly do so. But it would grant almost unlimited power to administrative agencies, and it professedly would duplicate how society was organized during World War II. The result almost certainly would be in a stronger version of the de facto executive rule prevailing then. I think we're already at a place where executive centralized power and control is even worse than at that point, significantly. But I think this is another step up. And I think Rob makes some excellent points here. I don't necessarily know if what the solution is, other than to resist at every turn possible, to not just rely on voting the bums out or the courts, because I don't think that Team A versus Team B is going to save us. If you follow my work here at 10th Amendment Center, my speeches, my talks, everyone on our team here, all of our bloggers, I think we all recognize, like Thomas Jefferson and James Madison, if we rely on the federal government to determine the extent of its own powers, that power is always, always going to grow. One other point that I want to just bring out here is the "until you do it, I'm the boss." I don't know if everybody heard this, but I didn't realize it until I read this article. My friend Hunter Hastings, who's been a supporter of TAC for quite a while, he helped get me to my first speaking event for the Mises Institute in early 2017. I think it was 2 years ago. And he now started a website called the Center for Individualism. He talks about liberty, libertarianism, individual liberty, but focuses on entrepreneurship. But you'll find a lot of interesting articles over here as well. And I read this article that was reposted from Reason, and I didn't realize that AOC was taking this view, and it really comes across as command and control until you come up with something else. If you don't like it, you don't like the Green New Deal, you don't come up with something better. And this is boxing people in. Like, it's somehow, instead of just saying this is trash, we don't want it, now she's creating the false narrative of just come up with something better for the environment. And I'm the boss. This is the mentality of people in government. And in this article from Matthew Harwood, he says, if proponents of the Green New Deal are serious, and there's no reason to doubt them, then they're proposing a return to a militaristic America where Uncle Sam's, and I pause there, because I'm very grateful for people pointing out that this is a militaristic program. But on the other hand, saying that it's a return to a militaristic America implies that it hasn't been militaristic. And if you talk about a federal militarization of local police, which they do through handouts of weapons, gear, surveillance toys, stingray devices, facial recognition, drones, all with the ability to spy on you, license plate readers to spy on you, monitor what you do, building SWAT teams, the drug war, asset forfeiture, foreign policy, endless foreign wars, gun control. These are all militaristic programs because it requires the barrel of a gun to enforce. So the society has been militarized all along, in my view. So I just need to kind of point that out. This is a very good article, but I don't want you guys to think that I think things are okay now, and it's just the Green New Deal is the problem. It's a militarized society, and It's a militarized, centralized command and control structure in Washington, D.C. that has almost nothing to do with the vision of the founders under the Constitution, the people who ratified it through the several states' ratification conventions. There's nothing like it. Almost nothing. I mean, like a broken clock, every now and then the feds do something that they're supposed to do, but a vast majority of what they do, they shouldn't. And they do it through force or fear of force. And that couldn't be in and of itself. That is a militaristic, fascist command and control government as it is. So I don't want you guys to think that I'm okay with the status quo, because I'm not. Indefinite detention under the NDAA, people being able to be locked up forever without access to a lawyer, without being told of their charges, that couldn't be worse. So going back to the article. Sorry for that kind of side note ramble. But if proponents of the Green New Deal are serious, they're proposing a return to a militaristic America where Uncle Sam's heavy hand intervenes in all aspects of life, curtailing individual freedom in pursuit of their collectivist goals. Again, I have a hard time getting past this, and every time I read it, this is like the fourth time I've read it now. But if you think about government being involved in every aspect of our lives, they're already telling us what kind of plants we can grow in our backyard, how big our toilet can be, what kind of light bulb we can grow. They tell us the word shall not be infringed means something other than shall not be infringed. They're already involved in almost every aspect of our lives. This is the standard rule of things. It always gets worse. It doesn't go from 0 to 100 in one step. If it's getting to 100, and we think it's horrible, one of the best solutions, the first step should be to, well, how did it get here? And it didn't go from FDR to AOC. There's a lot in between that has been total garbage. Basically, everyone in Congress, all those times, everyone in the White House, all the executive agencies, almost all of them have been enemies to the Constitution. But it's an interesting article talking about the militarization of the Green New Deal. And he closes out the article. It says, when she says, I'm the boss, like Bush, when he said, I'm the decider, same mentality. She's describing America under a Green New Deal, a place where you'll do as you're told. Justin Bayola, I appreciate. They should have no police force at all. No ATF, no DEA, none. Absolutely. No FBI, no NSA. Local police, of course, it's a local concern. But this is not a federal concern. I mean, that doesn't mean I necessarily support the local police, but I do recognize, especially here in LA, the LAPD is a military force, and they're really, really bad. They're dangerous. They are not protecting my liberty. They are generally out there to take them. Thankfully, unlike the East Coast, and for those of us who spend time back and forth sometimes, when I go back east, I notice a very strong presence of police in cities like New York, Philly, Boston, etc. Here in LA, I can go weeks without seeing a cop, and I'm out on foot in the center of the city very often. Once in a while, I'll see one driving by, but I don't see them very often, thankfully. But maybe they've got drones. I don't know. I don't trust these people. They're dangerous. And they're enforcing all kinds of federal programs that they shouldn't be enforcing. And they're really bad on the right to keep and bear arms. I mean, some of the worst on earth are right here in Los Angeles. And of course, they're just doing their job, following the law, which they shouldn't be. The law is the Constitution of the state and the Constitution of the federal government, but that's a different story. That's what they swear an oath to. Michael Baker says, over on Facebook, says the Green New Deal is entirely socialist. Remember when Bush took away our right to use whatever light bulb we wanted? Now picture that, and that's what I was basically mentioning. Now picture that with everything else, and you have socialism. Now, I think, for me, it's hard to separate because it's the centralized command and control structure that fit under both. He says it would be the tragedy of California, except everywhere. Frank I says, how convenient that local authorities are already militarized. And we were told by many people on the right that we shouldn't oppose the 1033 program or the department or the JAG program that gives out military equipment. They're going to use this. If you only think like, I want the cops to be geared up to get bad guys, think how someone in the future, an AOC, someone who says, I'm the boss, how would they use a militarized local police force to implement a Green New Deal? To me, it's a very dangerous, dangerous situations. Tyler B says, I try not to mess with cops at all. My joke is I don't look them in the eyes, especially around here. It's like they got laser eyes. Jeffersonian Press, who I appreciate all the feedback you've been leaving us. Thank you very much. Under fascism, men retain the semblance or pretense of private property, but the government has total power over its use and disposal. That's Ayn Rand. And under this definition, Jeffersonian Press writes, we already live under fascism. And in many ways, I think that's absolutely correct. Anyways, I hope you guys found this interesting. I'm learning as I go on this. This is not a topic that I cover a lot. I primarily pick up on what I learned on socialism and fascism from websites like tomwoods.com, Tom's great podcast, of course, Mises.org, fee.org, a number of others. Sometimes Cato Institute does some good stuff. They tend to be a little bit more milquetoast, but I do read them as well. Obviously, Reason, they talked about this, republished over at Center for Individualism. So I'm learning as I go. I hope I did a decent job covering this. I'm mostly just interjecting my thoughts on what smarter people than I had to say. But I hope you found it interesting. And I think Austrian Watchman has got a good point here on YouTube. It's hard for you to find the difference between fascism and socialism because there is very little. That's how I feel. And I'm sure, again, there's probably an avowed fascist or an avowed socialist who will tell me how stupid I am. And maybe I am, but whatever. That's how I feel about it. That's how I see it playing out. Because when it comes down to your individual choice under either one of these systems or versions of them, you don't have free choice, or you only have it in limited areas. And that does not sound like individual liberty to me. Again, thank you so much for spending some time with me. Of course, smash the like, subscribe, leave some comments, share the link, all that good stuff. iTunes, leaving reviews helps a lot. All these things, these free actions of hitting like buttons and reviewing and commenting and all that stuff, it triggers the platform that you watch or listen on, and it tells that platform to show the program to more people. We've had a lot of new people come in recently, and I'm grateful for everyone, new and old. And of course, I'll see you on Friday, and of course, every Monday, Wednesday, Friday, 9:30 a.m. Pacific time for another episode of Good Morning Liberty. Thank you so much for joining me, and have a great day.